Welcome, weary traveler, to Boring Bedtime. I'm your guide to the past, and I invite you now to drift into calm as we settle in for tonight's epic yet soothing tale. Close your eyes, let go of the day, and let the sounds of the battle fade into the distance. Tonight, we journey to the dusty, unforgiving plains of the Yarmouk River in 636 AD. Imagine the impossible dilemma facing one man, General Khalid Ibn Walid, the Sword of Allah. He stood with 40,000 men facing a Roman army 3 times his size, an army chained together. An iron wall of 120,000 soldiers determined to wipe him out. This wasn't a fair fight, it was a desperate forge. How do you defeat a mountain of iron with only a whisper of desert air? The answer lies not in brute strength, but in a tactical blueprint so brilliant it changed history. Tonight, we uncover Khalid's crucible and the story of the first 3 desperate days of fire and fury. Settle in. Your journey to sleep begins now. Khalid's crucible, the tactical blueprint, the problem of the Phalanx on the barren plain of the Yarmouk. The dilemma facing Khalid Ibn Walid was simple yet existential. His 40,000 men, mostly light cavalry and mobile infantry, had to find a way to defeat a Byzantine army of 120,000, anchored by the Iron Chain, al-Silsila. The Iron Chain was not just a defensive barrier, it was a denial of Arab warfare itself. The Muslim army's great strength lay in fluidity, feigned retreat, rapid flanking, and hitting weak points. The chained formations negated all of this. They presented an almost static, massive block that could not be rooted or broken by cavalry charges. Attacking them head-on would lead to the slaughter of the lightly armored Arabs. Khalid's mind worked with the precision of a master craftsman forging a desperate tool. He could not beat the Byzantine army at its own game of mass and heavy armor. He had to create a new game, entirely one based on discipline, maneuver, and moral certainty. Formation, fragmentation for flexibility. Khalid's first revolutionary order, already introduced during the retreat, was cemented. The army was deployed not in 4 large, distinct columns, but in 36 smaller, autonomous battalions known as Kurdoos. This fragmentation was the key to handling the enemy's size. The entire Muslim front line was split into 4 main corps, matching the traditional Byzantine deployment. Right flank, commanded by Amr ibn Alas. Right center, commanded by Shurabil ibn Hassana. Left center, commanded by Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan. Left flank, commanded by Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Each of these corps was further subdivided into the Kurdoos. The brilliance of this setup was the internal rotation system. If the Byzantine pressure became too great on one Kurdoos, the unit could fall back, and the battalion immediately behind it would move up to fill the gap. This provided a tactical depth and resilience that the Byzantines, operating in large, fixed columns, lacked. It meant the Muslim line could bend without breaking. Khalid's order was absolute. Hold the line for the first 4 days. The goal was not to win immediately, but to survive the initial shock, allowing the summer heat, the rough terrain, and the logistical burden to slowly begin the work of dismantling the massive Byzantine machine. The women's corps, the moral barrier, at the rear of each of the 4 corps, Khalid placed the women's corps. This was perhaps the most crucial psychological element of his plan, demonstrating the total communal commitment to the defense of the caliphate. These women, many of them veterans of the Ridda Wars, were armed with poles, stones, and swords. Their role was clear and terrifying. They were the moral deterrent against flight. Their most famous leader was Khalid bint al-Aswar, a fierce warrior known to ride into battle disguised in armor. Her instructions to the women were simple. Any soldier who attempted to retreat, to break ranks and run from the Byzantine charge, was to be publicly shamed, stripped of his weapons, and, if necessary, struck and driven back into the fray. A soldier might fear the Byzantine spear, but no man of the desert could bear the shame of being routed and beaten by a woman. This ensured that every man in the Muslim army knew there was no safety in retreat, and that the only path to survival lay in standing firm. The women escorts turned the deep ravines behind the Muslim camp from a potential trap into an absolute, unyielding wall of desperate finality. The Tali'a, the hammer of God, Khalid's greatest innovation, and the eventual key to victory, was the disciplined, surgical use of his strategic reserve cavalry, his own elite mobile guard, the Tali'a, or flying column. This force, numbering approximately 4,000 highly trained horsemen, was held completely out of the initial contact. It was the surgical tool, not the frontline shield. Khalid stationed the Tali'a behind the main Muslim line, ready to move in an instant. His tactical blueprint for the Tali'a was revolutionary: internal transfer instead of charging the enemy. The cavalry's primary role was to move horizontally and internally behind the Muslim lines. If the left flank began to buckle under a Byzantine attack, Khalid would launch the Tali'a from the center, moving them quickly behind the Muslim ranks to reinforce the struggling left flank, then immediately withdrawing. The shock counter, the Tali'a, would only be committed to direct attack when a Byzantine charge had reached its maximum momentum and was beginning to slow down from the effort of pushing the Muslim lines. Khalid would hit the flanks of the exhausted Byzantine corps with fresh, disciplined cavalry, immediately throwing the enemy's heavy formation into fatal disorder. The plan was a study in patience. Khalid, the general notorious for his immediate, decisive, and often reckless charges, was now demanding stoic defense and absolute obedience from his men. He was prepared to absorb heavy losses, trusting that the Byzantines, fighting far from home and bound by heavy armor and iron chains, would suffer more from exhaustion and logistics than from the fighting itself. The pre-battle duel on the morning of the first day before the general advance, Vahan, the Byzantine commander, attempted one last psychological maneuver. He sent forward his finest champion, a towering Slavic prince, to challenge the Muslim leadership to single combat. The goal was to demoralize the Arabs by killing one of their generals in front of the assembled host. Khalid, recognizing the importance of this moment, took up the challenge himself. He rode out in the open plain and confronted the giant. The duel was brief and decisive. Khalid, famous for his skill and terrifying speed, dispatched the champion quickly, silencing the thousands of Byzantine soldiers who had come to witness a victory. This single act of personal heroism accomplished two things. It confirmed the terrifying presence of the Cephala to the Byzantines, and it erased any lingering doubt among the Muslim troops, reaffirming Khalid's position as the absolute point of hope and martial genius. The final command, with the sun rising higher, promising a day of infernal heat, the vast Byzantine army began its advance. The ground trembled under the measured. Khalid gave his final, simple commands, which were repeated down the lines of the Kurdoos. Let them tire themselves against the ravines. Let the heat break their spirit. You do not move until you hear the signal. Patience is the sword of the disciplined. And remember the women at your backs. There is no retreat today. There is only victory or paradise. The disciplined, fluid formations of the Caliphate army braced themselves. The 6-day battle for the heart of the Levant and the fate of two empires had begun. The days of fire and fury. Yarmouk, Day 1, 2, 3, Day 1. The hammer blow, August 15th, 636 CE. The Battle of Yarmouk did not begin with skirmishes. It began with a roar as the sun climbed, baking the dusty plain. The massive Byzantine host, organized and directed by General Vahan, began its slow, deliberate advance. The sheer scale was terrifying. The center was dominated by the terrifying sight of the Iron Chain al-Silsila heavy infantry, linked by actual shackles, advancing as an unyielding wall. Their movement was accompanied by the deafening sound of drums, horns, and chants, designed to crush the spirit of the smaller, lighter Arab force. Vahan's strategy for Day 1 was simple: shatter the flanks and roll the Muslim line inwards. He hurled the majority of his auxiliary cavalry, Armenians and Christian Arabs, under Jabal against the wings, hoping to exploit the Muslim army's relatively short front line. The shock of the collision was immediate and catastrophic for the Muslim flanks. The heavy Byzantine cavalry, trained in the Qantas heavy lance charge, hit the right flank commanded by Amr ibn Alas with immense force. The Muslim ranks, built of light horsemen and archers, buckled instantly. The disciplined fragmentation of Khalid's design, the Kurdoos system, saved the day. As the first line of battalions collapsed under the weight of the Roman charge, they executed a controlled retreat, falling back to reform, while the Kurdoos immediately behind them surged forward to meet the enemy. This continuous rotation ensured the line bent sharply backward like a drawn bowstring, absorbing the kinetic energy of the charge, but did not snap. Yet, retreat was still a terrifying prospect, as the soldiers of Amir's command fell back in tactical disorder. They saw, looming behind their camp, the armed figures of the women's corps. Khala bint al-Aswar, riding at the forefront of her reserve, stood like a fiery sentinel when soldiers, panicked by the mass of the Byzantine army, attempted to bolt towards the sanctuary of the ravines. She and her women met them not with comfort, but with harsh, terrifying fury. "Where is your courage, O people of God?" she reportedly shouted, striking a fleeing soldier with the flat of her sword. "Are you running from the promise of paradise into the certainty of shame? Go back, fight for your honor." The shame of being physically driven back by the women was a far greater deterrent than the fear of death. The soldiers, reeling but rallied, reformed their lines and charged back into the fray. This psychological defense proved decisive. The Muslim lines held just long enough for the momentum of the Byzantine charge to exhaust itself under the relentless August sun. By dusk, the Byzantines had gained ground, but they had failed to break the Muslim line. Khalid's men had absorbed the blow, achieving their primary goal for the day: survival. Day 2, the fire and the flying column. The second day dawned, with Vahan realizing that the Arab forces, though flexible, were also brittle. He decided to focus the full power of his attack on the most successful area of his advance from the previous day: the Muslim right flank, Amr ibn Alas and Shurabil ibn Hassana's command. The objective was not just to push them back, but to roll them into the central ravine, the Wadi al-Rukud, cutting off the entire right wing of the Muslim army. The attack was relentless. The heavy Roman infantry, backed by massive concentrations of archers who rained arrows down upon the lightly protected Arabs, pressed forward with brutal efficiency. The Muslim right flank began to crumble rapidly, sustaining heavy casualties. The Kurdoos' rotation was happening almost non-stop, and the men were nearing the point of physical and mental exhaustion. This was the moment Khalid had prepared for. He had spent the first 2 hours observing the battlefield from his central vantage point, watching the Byzantine charge reach its inevitable maximum speed and then begin to stall as the weight of their advance created friction and exhaustion. He gave the signal to his Tali'a mobile guard. The 4,000 elite cavalry were not sent against the advancing Byzantine front. Instead, they were executed a series of surgical internal maneuvers. Khalid first ordered 2,000 horsemen to ride swiftly behind the Muslim lines and strike the press in the pressing Byzantine cavalry on the Muslim right. This was a direct, devastating shock counter, hitting the Byzantines where their discipline was weakest. Before the Byzantines could rally from this sudden, sharp shock, Khalid ordered the remaining 2,000 cavalry to execute the same counterattack on the other side of the flank. These were not sustained engagements. The Tali'a struck hard, withdrew rapidly, and then immediately repositioned. Their goal was not to occupy ground, but to restore equilibrium to the Muslim line. The sudden, coordinated, and unexpected shock of fresh, elite cavalry hitting their exposed flanks threw the Byzantine command into confusion. They could not understand how the Arab reserves could appear instantly in two places at once. The Muslim lines, instantly relieved of the pressure, surged forward in a morale-fueled counterattack. The ground lost in the morning was regained by afternoon. Vahan was forced to commit his own strategic reserve to prevent the total collapse of his right wing. By sundown on day 2, the situation was a bloody, desperate stalemate. Proving Khalid's brilliance, the Tali'a was the perfect antidote to the Byzantine mass, using speed and surgical precision to counter raw numbers. And so, on the second day, the battle was left as a bloody, desperate stalemate. Khalid's brilliance's flying column proved the perfect antidote to the overwhelming Roman might, using surgical speed to counter pure mass. But the greatest test is yet to come. The Romans have been repelled, but not broken. The final, terrifying act of this epic 6-day battle, the day the river ran, red dies, still ahead of us. Do not worry about the outcome tonight. The sand is cool. The drums of war have faded, and the past is safely behind you. Rest now. If you enjoyed this soothing journey into a truly incredible moment in military history, please remember to like this video. Share it with anyone else who needs to drift into calm. And above all, subscribe to Boring Bedtime so you don't miss the final decisive chapter of the Sword of Allah.